Please don't skip ahead yet. Hi, this is your friendly neighborhood 80 slasher librarian, Josh LaRue. Just need a moment of your time. A lot of people don't know, but we're not able to monetize the channel here on YouTube due to the fact that the copyright holders of the books I narrate, the movies we riff, they get the ad revenue, and also being a partner on YouTube involves a lot of rules and censorship, and to do so would make it where a lot of the content, the audiobooks, the riffs, would have to be heavily censored or deleted completely. So we depend on amazing slashaholics like you to help fund the channel and keep it going and growing for years to come. And there's several fun ways to do that. You could join our Patreon right up there. And as a patron, you can join for as low as like $2, $5, $10 a month, on up as high as you want, and enjoy a lot of cool gifts like free ebooks, early access, exclusive content, even voicing characters and audiobooks here on the channel. You could also go to our PayPal and use the QR code right there, and you can donate directly to the channel. We see all donations and we appreciate all of them. If you don't want to use the QR code or don't know how, you can use our PayPal email address, which will be in the description below and the pinned comment, as well as our Cash App donation username. And a fun way to help the channel is through our Cameo, right down there. On Cameo, you can ask for a birthday video, anniversary video. You can ask us to sing a song or something, or ask us questions, and you can get a video from me, Alex, Sean, Master Evil, Mother Evil, the Rodeo Clown, any character from any show on the channel, or any character that I've voiced in the audiobooks. It's a fun way to help the channel. It's only $10 a video, and we'll have a lot of fun doing that. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's content. Be excellent to each other. Please consider helping the channel. And always remember, the sun never sets on those who ride into it. Thank you. Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. The Novelization by Landon Turner. Chapter 4. As a dark and eerie night continued to envelop the Shepherd house like an all-encompassing and oppressive cloud, there was a hesitant knock at the back door. Mrs. Shepherd was standing in the kitchen, washing her hands, and she frowned, wondering who it could be at this hour of the night. It was nearly 10:30. It's probably one of the kids from next door, she thought. She went to the back door and opened it. A young, handsome man was standing on the covered porch, smiling awkwardly and holding a pink sweatshirt. "Hi," he said kindly. "I'm Nick. I'm looking for the girl who lives here." "Oh, hi, I'm Amanda Shepherd. She's right here," Mrs. Shepherd said, turning to see Tina standing in the kitchen doorway. "I washed this for you," Nick said to Tina. She took the sweatshirt from his hands and smiled at him, blushing as he stared into her eyes. "So, have you been having fun up here?" Mrs. Shepherd asked, correctly assuming that he was part of the group that was renting the house next door. Yeah. A bunch of us got together to throw my cousin Michael a surprise birthday party. I came over to invite your daughter," Nick said. Tina glanced at her mother. "I don't know," Tina said nervously. "Well, you could always spend the evening with me and Dr. Cruz," Mrs. Shepherd said with a sly smile. Tina smiled and then looked at Nick, nodding. "Let's go," she said, handing the sweatshirt to her mother. Tina and Nick left out the back door, and Mrs. Shepherd closed the door, with the smile still on her face. Perfect, she thought. It was a chance for Tina to hang out with others and socialize. It had never been easy for Tina to make friends, and as she watched Tina out the kitchen window, she grew anxious. What would happen if she freaked out? Mrs. Shepherd couldn't help but feel intensely sorry for her daughter, and she didn't want it to turn into pity, but pity seemed to be an appropriate response. Sometimes Mrs. Shepherd wondered if she had done something wrong during her pregnancy with Tina that had given her so many problems. She didn't drink or smoke, ever. So there was no way she had brought this situation into her life herself. But something in the back of her mind made her feel guilty as a parent. Then again, she knew that parenting wasn't easy, and at least Tina was physically healthy as far as she could tell. But mentally? Mrs. Shepherd had ultimately began to worry that Tina would end up in the hospital her entire life, and with John gone, those medical bills would make things extremely difficult. Maybe that was why she had decided to take such drastic measures with Dr. Cruz and bring Tina back here. Mrs. Shepherd truly felt deep down like this was their only hope, their lifeline to a more stable existence, an existence where they could move on from John's untimely death and start fresh. Nothing else had worked, and Amanda felt like she had nothing more to lose. There was a creak on the old floorboards, and Mrs. Shepherd turned around quickly, snapping out of her thoughts to see Dr. Cruz standing in the doorway, looking confused. "Where'd she go? Who's that boy?" he asked with concern. "Oh, relax, Dr. Cruz," Mrs. Shepherd said. "She's going to visit the kids next door." "I thought we agreed on no distractions," he said firmly. "I'd hate to see her go back to the hospital." "She just needs a chance to be normal. Isn't that what this is all about?" Mrs. Shepherd said. He hesitated. Yes, of course it is." Tina and Nick were walking side by side down the path to the rental house. They had been walking in awkward silence for some time. Tina noticed his eyes glancing at her and averted her gaze nervously. "So, are you much for parties?" Nick asked her, his hands in his pockets as they climbed onto the sprawling front porch of the rental home. "You know, like, cake and ice cream." Tina didn't know what to say. They pushed open the front door of the rental cabin, and the party hit Tina like a truck. Boisterous laughter and loud music emanated from the room. Her eyes widened. She had never been to a college party before, much less any kind of party. Memories of her lonely past birthday parties flooded her mind, and she shuddered. As she looked around, she saw a few 19 and 20-year-olds were sitting on couches, chatting and laughing with one another in high spirits, most of them with some kind of a drink in their hand. It made Tina incredibly nervous. A knot twisted tightly in her stomach, but she swallowed hard and remained calm. Suddenly, Russell, who was carrying a large bucket of ice and champagne, started to fall, and Nick saved him from spilling the expensive alcohol all over the floor. And then, while Nick was distracted, a short, stocky guy in his 20s with dark hair, wearing a United States Air Force jacket, extended his hand towards Tina. When she didn't return the favor, he grabbed her anyways and pulled her aside. "All right, I need an objective opinion," Eddie said, as Tina stared at him like a deer caught in the headlights. "What do you think of StarlyCon?" Eddie asked Tina enthusiastically. He held up a notepad where he had been sitting and writing down his ideas. "Listen, 30,000 years into the future, the entire galaxy is populated, all right, by highly evolved protozoa." "Good, huh?" said Eddie, proud of his work. Tina forced a tight smile, trying to be polite, and started backing away from Eddie towards Nick. "Only one human being and his woman still exist amongst the stars, and it's their duty to save the planet," Eddie went on, as Nick came up behind Tina and gingerly put his hands on her shoulders. "I see you met our resident writer, Eddie," Nick said. As Eddie continued explaining his novel, Tina glared at Nick. "Ice cream and cake, huh?" she said wryly. "Eddie's a little out there, but believe me, Tina, everybody else here is perfectly normal," Nick replied. Normal, Tina thought. Great, so much for fitting in. Tina glanced around the room cautiously, trying to mask her fear. Her eyes coming to rest on an attractive young guy smoking a joint and blowing it towards her. She gave Nick another look. Nearby, Russell and Eddie started to converse. "Russell, can I talk to you for a minute?" said Eddie nervously. "What's up?" sighed Russell. "This Melissa girl," said Eddie. "She's incredible. She's like a Numerian Catwoman." "What are you talking about?" asked Russell. "Sandra's friend Melissa." "Cool your jets, pal. She's out of your league," said Russell. "Her father brings home 6 figures. Face it, you're outclassed." Russell then walked away from him as Eddie hung his head. Nick ushered Tina into the kitchen and away from Eddie, where a foxy redhead, also in her early 20s, was talking to a blonde mousy girl wearing big glasses. "So," he goes, "let me see your ID," the redhead said, clearly in the middle of a juicy story. So I go, "Well, I left it at home." And he goes, "Well, you have to go and get it." So I go, "Okay," and I go. "Put something under that drink. You're going to ruin the tables," said Russell from the living room. As the redhead's voice trailed off, the young dark-haired stoner, who Tina had heard being called David, came waltzing into the kitchen to grab a beer, starting to shotgun it. The redhead stared at him dreamily as he swaggered back into the living room. "Outrageous," the redhead said, smiling from ear to ear. "Do you like David?" the blonde girl with glasses said. The redhead nodded. "Me too," the blonde one said. And then Russell came barging into the kitchen, furious, with Sandra following behind him. The kitchen was a mess. Empty beer cans littered the counter, the freezer had been literally emptied, and packages of string cheese, ice cream, and juice were scattered all around the counters. "God, would you look at this? This party hasn't even started and the place already looks like closing time at the stock exchange," Russell grumbled. "Russ, honey, we'll clean it up, I promise," Sandra reassured him. "Yeah, chill out, Brooks Brothers," said the fiery redhead. "But they're eating my uncle's food. We were supposed to bring our own food," Russell said, shooting a dirty look at the two girls who were busy snacking. "My uncle is gonna shit," Russell complained. And then Nick spoke up, awkwardly. "Hey, everyone!" The redhead, the girl with glasses, and Russell and Sandra turned to look at the young, blonde stranger who stood in the kitchen next to Nick. "This is Tina, from next door," he said. "Hi, I'm Robin," the redhead said, "and this is Maddie." She gestured to the blonde girl with glasses. All of a sudden, there was a resounding crash that came from the living room. "Oh, shit!" Sandra exclaimed and ran into the living room, grabbing Nick by his denim jacket and hugging him with her. "Nick, help me." This left Tina alone in the kitchen. She stood in a bungling attempt to appear normal with her hands in the pockets of her slacks. From another door that led to a back staircase came one of the tall blondes who had been insulting Tina earlier. She now wore a blue pantsuit and an expensive-looking pearl necklace. "Now there's a guy I'd like to throw a surprise party for," she said, watching Nick leave the room. Then her eyes directed right at Tina. "Hi, I'm Melissa," the blonde woman said with a distinguished air. "I'm Tina from next door," Tina replied meekly. "I know," Melissa said, narrowing her eyes at Tina. Her passive aggression was leaking out through her words, and she turned and walked around the kitchen island towards Robin and Maddie. "Maddie, who is that scuzzball dopehead?" Russell asked, gesturing to the living room where he was positive that David had knocked down something very expensive. "I told him not to smoke in the house." "Only the birthday boy's best friend?" said Melissa matter-of-factly. "Melissa, those are so pretty, absolutely gorgeous. Where did you get them?" Maddie asked, touching Melissa's pearl necklace gently. "What a stupid place to put a lamp," said David, who was coming into the kitchen and rubbing his head. Russell's jaw tightened. Nick walked back into the kitchen as well, handing Tina a bottle of cream soda. "They're real," Melissa said to Maddie, showing off her bling for the entire room to see. "On my last birthday, my daddy goes, 'Melissa, you're the perfect daughter.'" Melissa went on like she was in a soap opera. "And he gives me these and says, 'To the best little girl in the whole world.'" Meanwhile, David was shotgunning another can of beer, resulting in most of it ending up on the floor. Beer sprayed everywhere as he choked, and Russell threw up his hands in frustration. "Ah, disgusting!" Melissa cried. Tina started to laugh, but then her entire face dropped. She was no longer focused on the college kid's shenanigans. She was laser-focused on something else. Movement. Behind Robin stood a massive, hideous, and terrifying man in a hockey mask, the same one from the lake. A young boy, no more than 20, was profusely bleeding from the mouth. The metal tip of a tent spike protruded from his stomach. The man in the hockey mask ripped the long steel spike out of his spine. More blood sprayed out. It painted the wall behind the monstrous man. Tina's jaw dropped. Her eyes filled with dread as she stared in raw, unblinking, paralyzing terror at the sight of a psychopathic killer ravaging his young victim. It was him, from the lake. No, not again, she thought. Not again. Her eyes flickered over to Nick, who was smiling and laughing at David. Nobody else could see it. My God, I'm the only one who can see it, she thought. The cream soda fell onto the kitchen floor and shattered, as the rest of the party turned to look at her. Everything went silent, and Tina ran for the back door, disappearing out into the night. Onwards, the deep maliciousness stalked through the woods of Crystal Lake. Mile after mile went by, but it felt like nothing to him. The past hour felt like mere minutes to this beast. The area was beginning to feel somewhat familiar to him. Memories had been slowly filling his mind. Distant memories, fractured memories. Images of blood and tissue being slashed and mangled flashed into his unhinged mind. Anguished screams filled his ears. They slowly were making him thirst for the kill again. His rotting hand was still curled around the blood-soaked tent spike. What angered him now was how different his campground seemed. They had been here. Them. They had come in and built their homes and camps all around his woods, tearing his world apart. These woods were all he knew. After all, he had survived out here for years, and now he was back. More distant and hazy memories flooded him. A woman came into view, surrounded by bright white light. "Jason," the woman said in a comforting, maternal tone. "They'll never kill you, Jason. They all must pay." He remembered her vividly now. Her voice was ringing in his ears like an alarm bell. It was the one who had cared for him and protected him as a young child, commanding him to keep killing. And Jason listened. How could he not? Her voice had been his only source of comfort as a child, his only solace from a world that refused to accept him for what he was. Memories of a place were now in his head. A campground, log cabins, a grassy field that served as an archery range, a sparkling lake. It was his home. Days he would spend out there, catching animals, spying on others, keenly attuned to their behavior and their mannerisms. He instinctively knew when someone was a typically more fearful type of person. He instinctively knew who would be a coward and who would be the one to fight back. He instinctively knew when other people were talking about him. It was as if he could just sense things. He could hear little sounds, tiny, almost inaudible sounds that other humans wouldn't be able to perceive. He could remember being incredibly adept at stealth from a young age. Spying on the other campers at Crystal Lake had been his favorite activity, and he almost always got away with it despite his deformed, abnormally larger body. He could still slink around and not be seen. There were many things like that, tiny subtle intelligences and abilities that Jason indeed possessed that had made him into what he was. He would watch the other campers and the counselors from afar, trying to soak in their normality like a sponge, but it never sank in for him. It was foreign to him, their laughter, their excitement for mundane things like birds or small animals, the way they touched each other affectionately and truly enjoyed life. None of it made sense to him, which made him angry, incredibly angry, angry enough to kill. And then they hadn't saved him when he was left to die, struggling alone in the deep, murky lake as it swallowed him whole. Then they took his mother. He remembered something else, a vision that fueled the rage inside him. His mother's head, severed from its body. an expression of surprise and horror permanently on its face. And that girl, the one who he sought vengeance on, the one who had decapitated his mother on that summer night back years ago. They had done it to her. All of them. The ones who were supposed to be watching him. The ones who cared about nothing but their own selfish desires. The ones who came to Crystal Lake. Camp Crystal Lake. He saw lights and went towards them. Pretty soon, he was standing at the edge of a clearing where one of their houses came into view. This Friday the 13th, they could all see and learn that his woods were not to be tarnished. Nobody would mess with his woods ever again. Once he showed them all how much pain he could make them feel. The same pain they inflicted on him and his mother. He could still hear her voice. "Jason, my sweet, sweet boy, they never cared for you." His hand gripped the tent spike harder as he heard something else. Voices, but this time they weren't in his head. Happy, carefree voices coming from one of the houses. On this Friday the 13th, their happiness wouldn't last because Jason was out there in the dark, and this time nothing and no one could save them. As tears blinded her, Tina ran down the path back to her home, back to her refuge, feeling the raw terror ricocheting off of her bones, like tiny bullets were hammering her. She had seen another vision, and this time it was more gruesome than any of the ones she had thus far. The color of the blood flashed into her mind. It had been flowing from his mouth like a waterfall. And then she had seen the man from the lake, slaughtering him. "God, I really am crazy," she thought as she stumbled through the darkness. She stopped and leaned against a tree, catching her breath. "I never should have gone over there," Tina thought. "What was I thinking? I'm too fucked up to be normal. I'm far from normal. I'm a freak." Then she heard something that abruptly severed her stream of panicked thoughts. Footsteps. A twig snapped. Tina jerked her head towards the sound, but there was nothing there. Then again, the darkness could have been fooling her. Maybe there was a figure standing just a few feet away watching her, shrouded in blackness. Tina immediately sprang back into action at the thought of that notion and ran towards her mother's house, tears still streaming down her cheeks. As she reached for the screen door leading to the covered porch, she froze. Her eyes widened. Her heart almost skipped a beat. The tent spike that the boy had been killed with was rammed into the wooden porch column. It protruded out into the night. Dark, purplish, coagulated blood was splattered all around the tip of the wickedly sharp spike. Tina couldn't believe it. But then she felt it. It was real as rain. She felt the coldness of the still. She took in a huge breath as her eyes scanned her surroundings. The man in the mask, she thought. He had to have been here. With the paralyzing image of the masked man using the tent spike on her running through her mind, Tina hurled open the screen door and scrambled inside. "Mom! Mom!" she cried frantically as she ran into the kitchen. Mrs. Shepherd became alarmed at the hysteria in her daughter's eyes. "What is it, Tina?" Mrs. Shepherd asked, grabbing Tina by her arms. "Mom, I saw him again," Tina cried, her eyes wide and filled with immeasurable terror. "What? Who?" Mrs. Shepherd asked. "The man, the thing, in the lake. I saw him again. He was killing a boy with a metal spike." "Tina!" proclaimed Dr. Cruz, who had walked in from the living room. He grabbed her firmly, almost snatching her from the arms of her mother. "Relax, relax," Tina glared at him. "What do you mean you saw him?" Dr. Cruz inquired. "Well, I didn't see it happen, but I know he's dead," Tina said. Dr. Cruz brought his hand up to his jaw, thinking. "All right," he said skeptically. "What were you doing right before it happened?" "Why?" Tina protested. Her eyes were flickering back and forth from the front door to the back door, as if she were terrified of something or someone coming in. "Because these are delusions," Dr. Cruz explained. "You're creating images of your father, Tina." Tina backed away, shaking her head, her lips curling with rage. "No! No! No! No!" she cried, and then her eyes widened as she remembered the tent spike. "All right, well, he left a large delusion stuck in our back porch," Tina said. Relief washed over her. Now she finally had evidence that what she had been seeing was real. "Why don't you go take a look if you don't believe me?" Dr. Cruz glanced at Mrs. Shepherd skeptically and then towards the back door. "All right, I will," he said. And with that, he walked into the kitchen and out of sight. Tina and her mother both heard the back door open and close, and then Tina fell into her mother's arms. "I know I'm right," she said through more tears. "I know I'm right." A few seconds passed by, and then Dr. Cruz's voice rang out from outside. "Tina!" he called. Tina and Mrs. Shepherd rushed outside to the back porch, and out the screen door, where Dr. Cruz was standing looking around cluelessly. "Where, Tina?" he asked. Tina gasped with bewilderment. Her eyes were affixed to the indentation in the wood where the tent spike had been lodged. The spike was gone. Tina was dumbstruck for a second, and then turned to her mother and the doctor, who both had expressions of disbelief. She pointed madly to the indentation in the wall. "It was right there! The large spike that I saw!" Her voice trailed off as she glanced at the indentation, shaking her head. "How?" she thought. "I have to be going crazy. It was right there, covered in that poor boy's blood." She should have gotten the blood on her fingers so she could have had some kind of substance, some kind of evidence for her claims, but she hadn't thought of it at the time. The indentation was there, but to her mother and Dr. Cruz it just looked like part of the old wood that the house was made from. She didn't know anymore. Tina turned to face them again. "What's happening to me?" she said, her voice breaking. "Help me, please." Another tear rolled down her cheek, and Dr. Cruz held her by both of her arms in an attempt to comfort her. "Shh," Dr. Cruz said. "I'm going to help you, but you have to help me." Mrs. Shepherd suddenly reached out and started ushering Tina back onto the porch. "Tina, honey, come in the house," she said. "Come on, sweetie." As Mrs. Shepherd led Tina back into the kitchen, Tina became a blubbering mess on the verge of another breakdown. I don't know what's happening," she said, stammering, becoming quickly overwhelmed with emotion. "It was there." Tina knew she saw something, but from the look in her mother's eye, she knew she sounded out of her mind. As crazy as it sounded, she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was out there. Something that had risen from the bottom of the lake. Something horrifying. Something Tina had never imagined in her wildest dreams. But nobody would believe her. And what was worse, Tina didn't know if she believed herself anymore. Nobody could save them from the evil that had been awakened. The 1965 Plymouth cruised down the highway just a mile from the dirt road that led to Crystal Lake. Dan Ackerman, a 35-year-old car salesman, was at the wheel, his eyes distractedly cutting over to his fiancée, Judy Williams, who scanned the rumpled and faded map in front of her. Dan had surprised her with an early honeymoon just last week. One thing she always had talked about was going camping near a lake out in the country, where they could wake up in the morning and skinny dip where nobody could see. So Dan had gone all out for her. He learned how to pitch a tent and had practiced in the backyard of their small duplex back in the city. He had mapped it all out as well and made sure that where they were going was on an easy road to traverse, and he had chosen the most efficient route. Crystal Lake had been a choice that most of their friends had been wary about. "Haven't you guys heard about what happened up there?" they would say. Dan and Judy had told them all not to give them the gory details. They didn't want their vacation ruined by horror stories. After all, what had happened had likely happened years ago. Crystal Lake had been where his mind was set on taking her for their excursion. He saw the brochure at a rest stop, and since then nobody had been able to sway him from his decision. Crystal Lake, he had thought, sounds like a relaxing place to be. What could be more romantic? Laying out under the stars with the great outdoors surrounding you, having some fun in the sun, and seeing his young blonde fiancée in a bikini. They had planned on a fun couple of days. First, they'd find a camping spot and maybe make love for the second time. Dan had ruined their first time due to him being a little too intoxicated, but this time he was planning on making it up to her. If it weren't for his damn religious parents getting in his head, he might not have fucked it up the first time. He had gotten in way over his head with way too much tequila that night, and nobody had told him that it could seriously impede your sexual appetite and your performance. Dan had had a case of whiskey dick, as they called it. He remembered being so nervous about being with a woman so attractive as Judy was, that he downed several drinks way too fast, and before he knew it, he was seriously making a fool of himself. Judy had laughed it off at the time, but he could tell that she did slightly resent him for it. But now he was ready, and they hadn't bought any booze for the weekend. Next, they'd go on a short hike around the lake, or maybe just half that route. It depended on how much sex they planned on having, and he just knew that once he got her alone in the woods, it would make for a very erotic few days. All of their unbridled passion could finally be released. With their busy work schedule, it was hard for them to breathe, much less get busy. He couldn't wait to fuck every morning in a tent with the birds singing over them and the sun streaming in through the tent flaps, without having to worry about any responsibilities. And Dan and Judy both had their responsibilities. Both worked full-time jobs to pay rent and were involved in their community. Community was how they had met. Judy was experienced, as some guys would say, but that hadn't thrown Dan off. He wasn't that type of guy who couldn't have sex with a girl who had a history. She had been up front with him about her sex life, and he had embraced it. After all, who wants to have sex with someone who doesn't know what they're doing? He thought to himself. He much preferred a girl who could get rough and not be timid, and Judy had a certain confidence about her. It made her super bossy at times, but Dan was getting past it. Besides, it was kind of his thing. After all, it made for a good time in bed, and she could get things that she wanted out of people. She was assertive in that way, and some men were threatened by it, but not Dan. If they were at a restaurant and the food was lousy, Judy was the kind of woman to say something about it and ask for a refund, instead of just leaving in silence. He thought strong, opinionated women were sexy in their own right, and sometimes in love you have to do that with a woman. Let her wear the pants sometimes. It made for a more interesting relationship dynamic, where they could help and serve one another instead of just one serving the other. Dan had flocked to some very aggressive women in his past and had gotten into some pretty toxic situations. But maybe Judy wasn't as batshit crazy as some of the women he had been with. She seemed to know how to just relax at times and give in when the time was right. She definitely had a lot more emotional control than most of the girls he had dated in college. She worked for a finance company, and it also hadn't bothered him that she made a bigger paycheck than he did. Again, some guys didn't like that, but not Dan. Money wasn't important to him. A good relationship is what mattered, and that's what he seemed to have with Judy. Something that would last. As he pulled onto the dirt road that led to Crystal Lake, Judy cleared her throat. "You know, we could have stopped for those kids back there," Judy said. "I'm on vacation," he protested. "I don't want to have to deal with people." Judy scoffed. "Well, maybe I shouldn't have come along," she teased with a flirtatious smile. "Oh, come on," he said. "You know what I mean." "Yeah, I know," Judy replied. It was just like her to tease him like that, Dan thought. It was incredibly sexy to him. She had first come on to him in a social group for single, unmarried bachelors and bachelorettes. Their first time meeting was an awkward one for Dan, to say the least. This time, Judy had been coming on to him instead of the other way around. It threw him off of his game for only a short time, but eventually a very playful and flirtatious game began. Soon they were back at his apartment and slowly taking off their clothes as they made small talk about their evening. And tonight, he couldn't wait to have a second chance to really please her, to make her glad she chose to get engaged to him, to make her look back at all of her wasted time and say to herself, "God, I'm glad I made it here." Tonight was definitely the night. They'd be all hot and sweaty after pitching the tent, and it would be the perfect time to just go at it. And this time he'd be sober. As Dan and Judy looked at the map, they took another turn onto an even smaller cowpath of a road. As Dan squinted through the windshield, he kept finding himself distracted by her and thoughts of what a good time he could show her. Another part of him felt uneasy about it. He could hear his parents' voices in his head again. "Wait until you're married," they had said. His folks were old school and very traditional. They hadn't even approved of Dan's last relationship, all because his last girlfriend had her nose pierced. "You're a man, Dan, and that means you're gonna feel things for women, but you have to be strong," his dad had told him. Well, here he was, with the girl that he knew was the one, out in the country on a peaceful summer night. What else could they do? Would he really waste a great experience over the advice of people who didn't grow up with a television or a microwave? So what if they weren't married yet, he thought. Surely God wouldn't mind if he had sex while they were engaged. Isn't love what it is all about? He only knew one thing, that he really loved this girl, and despite what his parents had said, he knew tonight would be the night. He couldn't hold it back any longer. His lust for her was consuming him, and he didn't care about angering God or his parents anymore. What they didn't know wouldn't hurt them, he decided. It was none of his parents' business when he decided to have sex with someone. He didn't worry about her getting pregnant, but they both had good jobs, albeit ones that were very busy and took up much of their lives. He wondered if he could ever make work and a family life manageable. Lots of families do it, he thought to himself. You hire a babysitter or send the kids to a daycare. Sure, leaving your children with strangers wasn't ideal, but it beat the hell out of not having the money to give them a future. It would be hard with both of them working. Although his parents had done it, and he knew with Judy's sharp mind they couldn't fail. The woman was smart, and he also found that incredibly irresistible. Math, Judy had said on the first date when he had asked her what she went to college for. She had explained that she wanted to teach math in high school or maybe middle school, but quickly found out it didn't pay well enough. So she switched to finance and tripled her income. At the time, he couldn't believe someone as attractive and intelligent as Judy was actually interested in him. And that's what had made him drink. But this time there was no alcohol and no people around to make him nervous. Maybe it had been the social setting of last time. Maybe this time the peace and quiet of the outdoors would soothe him and set him at ease, unlike the noisy clamor of wine glasses clinking and lots of laughter. "Crystal Lake, we're here," Dan said, as the lake came into view through the trees, shimmering in the light of the full moon. Now it was time to pitch the tent as fast as they could manage. And then it was time. Time to finally unleash all of their pent-up desires. And Dan wasn't about to let the previous generation or his previous screw-ups trick him into wasting his life away. Life was too short not to take those chances. As the Plymouth tediously drove down a hillside and down a winding tree-lined path, it came to stop in a large clearing. Lights from nearby houses penetrated through the thick boughs of trees, but they were all far away. It was a perfect little spot, away from anything and everything and everyone. As he parked the car, they sat in silence for a few moments, taking in the ambiance of the wilderness. An owl called from the trees, crickets were singing, the lake was gently lapping on the shore. Frogs croaked. "Well, let's start setting up camp," Dan said, as they both piled out of the car. They started by unloading their luggage and setting it down, and then they found 2 flashlights and used them to illuminate the small clearing. Then Dan started the fire in the center of the clearing, providing them with a warm orange glow. As Judy sat by the fire warming herself, Dan had the tent put up in less than 15 minutes, and pretty soon they were both sitting on logs by the fire and gazing at each other. Dan was drawn to the way her amber hair gleamed in the firelight. He had to have her. He could already picture their bodies intertwining underneath the stars. "I'm cold," she suddenly said, leaning closer to the fire. It broke the stillness, and Dan was snapped out of his reverie. "Well, let's crawl in the sack," Dan said with a suggestive grin. Then she cut her eyes at him, almost looking offended. "I think you need to fix the fire," she said, pointing to the puny flames in front of her. "Well, I'm out of wood," he snapped back. "We're in a forest." Dan leaned close to her on the log and started to kiss her. "Come on, let me warm you up." His lips slid across her cheek as she jerked her head away from him. "Dan," she protested, "we need wood." Wood, Dan thought. That made him even hornier. Frustrated, he slid back away from her and sighed. Judy smiled at him. "It's going to be a cold night tonight," she said, biting her lip at him. That was as good of a cue as he was going to get. This meant that if he went and got more wood to keep her warm, that he would definitely be getting some. With that, he unsheathed the long, slightly rusted machete and turned to her. "I'll be back," he said, in his best Arnold Schwarzenegger impersonation. Then he disappeared into the woods. Making sure that he was gone, Judy giggled excitedly and ran into the tent. She stripped down and crawled inside their single sleeping bag and began to patiently wait. Tonight was the night, she thought, but it would be a night that neither of them would see coming. As Dan hacked away at a small tree with his machete, he felt his arousal slowly fading. What had been wrong with Judy back at the campsite? She had been fine the whole ride up, and now she was getting all worked up about the fire not being hot enough? Typically, she was much more laid back. Now, here he was, tiring himself out in the middle of the cold wilderness to make sure she was comfortable. All he wanted to do was to please her. Now he had made a pass at her, and she had totally rebuffed him. Maybe she had a whole new side to her that he hadn't seen yet. That's what had happened with his last few relationships. Once he really got to know a woman and expressed vulnerability, their true colors came out, time and time again. But the night wasn't over, he told himself. Maybe she needed to be comfortable first before they could be together in that way. Some women were like that. He wished he hadn't screwed it up the first time, but that was then and this was now. What could be more erotic than doing it in the middle of nowhere with the stars and the moon above them? What had he done wrong? Maybe he had rushed things. Maybe they needed to have some foreplay beforehand to really get them both in the mood. They were both sober, so clearly alcohol was not an issue. He couldn't help but wonder if her attitude was really about the fire or something else. What could she be possibly pissed at him about, besides not picking up that stranded couple? There was no way he was picking up strangers in the dead of night up at Crystal Lake. Most of the Crystal Lake nonsense was mostly made up, he thought, but he would still rather be safe than sorry. He had heard all sorts of horror stories about hitchhikers in the woods. Sometimes he thought about if any of them were real. Once he had heard that serial killers will pretend to be stranded or pretend to have car trouble and then take their chance and shove you into the back seat, where you couldn't escape. He wasn't taking any chances. Not tonight, he thought. Not now that he finally had another chance with Judy. As he finished chopping off enough logs for the fire, he bundled them up in his arms along with his machete that he put in his sheath. Then he began the short walk back to the tent. The woods were almost pitch black and quiet, save for the crickets and other nighttime creatures. Should have brought that flashlight, he thought, but the moon provided him just enough light to see the small trail in front of him. Now it was time to build a nicer fire to really get her in the mood, and then it was finally time to redeem himself. As he carried the wood, he thought he heard something behind him. He shrugged it off, but then he heard it again, twigs and branches snapping under the weight of something truly immense, stalking towards him, coming up behind him faster and faster. Dan had no time to turn around. He registered the sour smell of decaying flesh and heard heavy, labored, maniacal breathing get more intense. The monstrous hand lunged savagely out of the black void around him, and Dan felt his insides implode. The logs fell to the ground in a pile. Dan felt something inside him, tearing through him like a missile. He stared down in incredulity at the meaty, blood-soaked fingers that protruded from his belly. The hand held his innards, squeezing them into mush before his very eyes. The next thing he knew, his head was being yanked backwards as the vertebrae of his spine snapped with a sickening crunch. His body crumpled into the leaves. The same bloody hand reached for the machete in the sheath on Dan's belt. Jason's fingers curled around the handle, and his hulking form made its way towards the tent, towards the sound of Judy's oblivious humming. Judy was getting more impatient by the minute. Where had the man gone, she thought. It was finally time. It was finally time to get a second chance, ever since he botched their first attempt at a romantic and intimate experience. She had been mortified at the time, but now that she was nude in her sleeping bag and Dan would return with the wood, sweaty and tired, she was thrilled. She hoped she hadn't made him angry with her teasing. It was getting colder, and as she snuggled in the sleeping bag, she thought she could hear him. A twig snapped. Someone was definitely coming. Judy smiled and sat up, pulling the sleeping bag up and covering her chest as she peered out the tent opening. "All right, you big hunk of a man, come and get me," she said. A shadow fell over the tent. It definitely couldn't have been Dan. This person was terrifyingly huge, like a boulder of body mass. It towered over the tent, and Judy shrieked as the tent was sliced open by Dan's machete, and a gigantic beast of a man wearing a hockey mask lunged at her. He was covered in detritus, and bits of flesh had rotted off, revealing the bone underneath. The smell of his putrid, rotting flesh was nauseating. It filled the tent. His demented eyes laser-focused on her, and she screamed again. Judy frantically crawled down into her sleeping bag in panicked fear, but soon felt herself being dragged out of the tent. She wrestled and wriggled around like a caterpillar caught in its cocoon, thrashing wildly, but Jason kept dragging her through the woods. Then he lifted her and swung her like she was a Louisville Slugger against the trunk of a large tree. Her head made an impact with the bark on the tree so hard it made everything rattle, and she felt warm blood leaking down her face. Her ears were ringing. Everything was on fire. Then he bashed her against the tree again and again. Her skull fractured, her ribs snapped, her screams stopped. Jason took a breath. It was exhilarating to him each time it happened. He had heard them both traipsing through the woods, and he knew that they had to die. The more he killed, the more it alleviated the pounding in his head and the voices. The voice of his mother that screamed at him, commanding him to kill the ones who let him die. The girl lying mangled in the bloody sleeping bag had only had to suffer for a short while, but Jason had been made to suffer for far too long at the bottom of the lake. They had done it to him, and they would all pay, one by one. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been Chapter 4 of Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood, the novelization by Landon Turner. A lot to unpack here. Thought it was a great chapter. I'm still not completely sure why Jason put that spike, the tent spike in the cabin, but let's step back a second. I really enjoyed what Landon did with the characters. I mean, of course, some of it's just going to feel like a repeat of the scene from the movie, but at least he delved a little bit more into the characters. I know there's a ton of them in this movie, and not a lot of them have a whole lot of texture to them. But great scene there. It was nice getting in Tina's head again, getting a little escape. Her mom even, wanting to help out, to help Tina socialize a little bit. Oh my God, that bastard Dr. Cruz just pisses. I feel nauseated voicing the bastard sometimes, I tell you. But yeah, I don't know why Jason put the tent spike in the cabin. Like, if he's going to go to that trouble, why doesn't he just come in and kill everybody, I wish Landon had maybe written like a little bit there explaining Jason putting the tent spike into the cabin and why he left. Maybe he got distracted or something, to go towards a different direction. That's something I was really hoping would be answered, but it's okay because I'm really enjoying Landon's work. I might have to ask him what his thoughts are on that, Maybe it's not too late for him to add it to the written book. Who knows? But yeah, the whole thing with Jason, the vision that she sees at the party freaking her out, I cannot imagine how mortifying that would be. And everybody just staring at her as she like runs away screaming or whatever. But the doctor hiding the spike, what an asshole. Just such a manipulator. He cannot die quick enough. And I really hope Landon makes his suffering and pain stretch out just a little bit longer in book form than movie form. I really enjoyed the stuff with Dan and Judy. We got an immense backstory for those two characters that I was not expecting. It was entertaining and funny. A little awkward to narrate at times, but that's okay. The kills were great. Just the terror and stuff that he's feeling looking down and seeing this hand that has burst through him, just holding his guts. And Landon did fix something from the movie when Judy got killed in the sleeping bag. It wasn't just one kill, so the MPAA can kiss our ass, because this is audiobook and ebook territory, and we got all 3 or 4 bashes against the tree. I think it was originally 7, but hey, I'll take 3 or 4. It's brutal. She felt every bit of it. Oh my God, it was just great. Landon, you did a great job on this chapter, and I hope everybody listening enjoyed this chapter as well. I'll be back very soon with the next chapter. Let me know what you all thought of tonight's narration in this chapter in the comment section below. I love to hear from each and every one of you. If you haven't ever commented before, please just drop in and say hi. I really do enjoy hearing from you. Let me know that you're enjoying what I do here on the channel. And if you want to support the channel and keep it going and growing, please know I cannot monetize the channel. So the only way to keep it funded is through Slashaholics like you, the listener. You can help out by signing up on Patreon, making a quick donation on PayPal or Cash App, or by ordering a $10 Cameo video on Cameo.com. All the information to do any or all of those things is in the description and the pinned comment down below. I'll be back very soon. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, be excellent to each other, and always remember, the sun never sets on those who ride into it. And between you and me, whatever you do, do not click that thumbs down button. Because, the thing is...
It's got a death curse!
Alright guys, I'll see you next time.